Millionaire CEO spends 3 years married, without touching his wife, until he decides to claim her and falls madly in love. Before we begin the story, until he decides to claim her, and falls madly in love. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Now, enjoy the story. Sarah Miller had been married to Jake Harrison, New York's most sought-after millionaire CEO, for 3 years, and he treated her as if she were invisible. In all that time, they had barely exchanged 50 words. She was nothing more than part of an arrangement she didn't fully understand. Her modest family needed money, and the Harrison family needed Jake to be married. That was it. Sarah went down to the kitchen at 6 o'clock a.m. Jake always had breakfast at 6:15, which gave her 15 minutes to eat and disappear. That was their quiet, painful routine every single day. But that morning, something was different. Jake was already coming down the stairs. Sarah quickly stood to leave, but this time something unusual happened. "Sarah." His cold voice froze her at the doorway. She slowly turned. Jake stood there, sharp in his flawless suit, his piercing blue eyes locked on her. It was the first time in months he had spoken her name. "Yes," Sarah replied, trying to hide the surprise in her voice. "Do you have something appropriate to wear to a corporate event?" he asked flatly, as if speaking to an employee. Sarah blinked, confused. "I don't understand. It's a simple question. Do you have a proper dress to accompany the CEO of Harrison Global to a gala dinner?" Sarah's heart began to race. In 3 years, she had never once appeared in public with him. "Why are you asking me this?" she said, summoning courage she didn't know she had. Jake studied her for a moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "Because tomorrow night at 7 p.m., you're coming with me." "But why?" "You never—" "Business reasons." He cut her off coldly. "I need to look like a stable family man. You are my wife, at least on paper." His words cut like knives. Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation. But she kept her head high. "And if I don't want to go?" Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her defiance. "That's not an option, Sarah. It's a duty." "A duty?" she repeated bitterly. "Like everything else in my life, right?" For a moment, something flickered in Jake's expression. It almost looked like regret, but it vanished so quickly Sarah thought she imagined it. "This event is important. International investors, $1 million contracts. You need to look presentable." Sarah lifted her chin with pride. "Presentable? You don't even know who I am, Jake. In 3 years, you've never cared to find out. I know enough." "You do?" Sarah stepped closer, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Then tell me, what's my favorite color?" "What did I study? What do I do during the long hours you ignore me in this house?" Jake stayed silent, clearly uncomfortable. "That's what I thought." Sarah sighed. "I'll go to your event, Mr. Harrison, but not out of duty." "I'll go because after 3 invisible years, I'm curious to see the world you chose over me." She walked past him, head held high. Jake stood there, watching her climb the stairs, and for the first time in 3 years, he truly saw the woman he had married. Sarah carried herself with grace, even in simple clothes. There was strength in her movements, dignity in the way she held herself. How had he never noticed before? Upstairs, Sarah sat on the bed, heart pounding. Tomorrow night, for the first time in 3 years, she would be seen publicly as Sarah Harrison. The question was she ready for what that might bring? Downstairs, Jake remained in the kitchen, feeling something strange stir in his chest. Why did her reaction suddenly affect him so deeply? Sarah looked in the mirror for the 10th time. The navy blue dress she had chosen was simple yet elegant, the only one she owned that could work for a formal event. She had bought it years ago, before the marriage, back when she still had hope for a normal social life. Exactly at 7 p.m., she descended the stairs. Jake was waiting in the living room, impeccable in his black tuxedo. When he saw her, he paused for a moment, as if something about her caught him off guard. "You look appropriate." That was all he said. But Sarah noticed his eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. The car drove them to the Grand Hyatt in Manhattan. The entire ride, they sat in silence. Sarah stared out the window, nervous hidden away for 3 years. And now she was about to be introduced as the wife of New York's most powerful CEO. "Remember," Jake said as they arrived, "you are Sarah Harrison. Smile, be polite, and don't talk about business. Got it? Be a pretty decoration and stay quiet," Sarah replied sarcastically. Jake glanced at her quickly, and for just a second, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. The room was filled with important people, businessmen, investors, socialites. Sarah felt like a walking fraud, but she carried herself with the poise she had learned by quietly observing her mother-in-law on rare occasions. "Jake," a tall, charming man approached. "I finally get to meet the mysterious wife. George Peterson." "My wife, Sarah," Jake introduced formally. George took Sarah's hand and kissed it politely. "It's a real pleasure, Sarah. I'm an international investor. I work with European markets." "The pleasure's mine," Sarah replied naturally, smiling. "Your wife is enchanting, Jake, and far more beautiful than the photos give her credit for." Sarah's curiosity spiked. Photos? She had never posed for any pictures as Jake's wife. "Do you speak any other languages, Sarah?" George asked, clearly interested. "Yes, I speak French and Spanish fluently." George's eyes lit up. "Magnificent. I've been looking for someone to help with a few South American contracts. Would you be interested?" Jake cut in sharply. "Sarah doesn't work." "What a waste," George said, still focused on Sarah. An intelligent and beautiful woman should use her talents. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. Finally, someone saw that she had more to offer than just being ornamental. "I'd love to help," Sarah said, ignoring Jake's warning look. "Perfect. How about dinner tomorrow to go over the details?" George suggested. "She's busy," Jake said coldly. "Actually, I'm not," Sarah replied, looking Jake directly in the eye. "I'd be happy to have dinner with you, Mr. Peterson." George gave a wide smile. "Excellent. I'll pick you up at 8. As George walked away, Jake gripped Sarah's arm harder than necessary. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, having a civilized conversation. "Something you might want to try. You're not having dinner with him." Sarah yanked her arm free. "And why not? You said it yourself, I'm only your wife on paper." "And on paper I can do whatever I want." Jake stared at her, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "You're my wife. Since when has that ever mattered to you?" For the rest of the night, Sarah noticed Jake never left her side, not even for a moment. Every time George approached, Jake appeared like a possessive bodyguard. It was strange, confusing. On the ride home, the tension in the car was suffocating. "You're not having dinner with him," Jake repeated. "Yes, I am," Sarah replied calmly. "Why?" "Just to irritate you." She turned to him. "To remind myself that I'm a real person, Jake. Someone with a mind, skills, value. Something you've completely forgotten." "I haven't forgotten anything." "No? Then tell me, when was the last time you really saw me?" "Not as an obligation, not as an object, but as a person." Jake stayed silent, his jaw tight, but Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. "That's what I thought," she murmured. When they got home, Sarah went straight to the bedroom. Before she stepped inside, she turned back to where Jake still stood in the hallway. "Thank you for tonight. It was revealing." "Sarah." His voice made her pause. "Yes?" Jake hesitated, as if about to say something important, but then shook his head. "Nothing." "Good night." Sarah entered the room, but sleep never came. For the first time in 3 years, she had seen something different in Jake: jealousy, possessiveness. Whatever it was, it had shaken him in a way nothing else ever had. Down the hall, Jake was still awake, pacing. The image of George touching Sarah's hand, making her smile, was burned into his mind. And worse, he felt a surge of irrational fury, a primal urge to keep every other man away from his wife. When had Sarah become his wife in his mind, and not just a family obligation? Jake stopped by the window, confused by his own emotions. In one single night, Sarah had cracked 3 years of carefully built indifference. Jake woke at 5 a.m., as always, but this time he couldn't fall back asleep. George Peterson's smile, his hand brushing against Sarah's, her laughter, it replayed in Jake's head like a brand seared into his mind. He got up and walked to the window. 3 years. 3 years living under the same roof with Sarah, and he had never felt this restless ache in his chest before. It was as if something primitive had awakened inside him, something he couldn't control or understand. Why the hell did he suddenly care if another man was interested in Sarah? He went downstairs earlier than usual, 6 o'clock. To his surprise, Sarah was already there, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. She was wearing a simple robe, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. Jake stopped in the doorway, really seeing her for the first time. How had he never noticed she was beautiful? Not just presentable, as he had called her last night, but truly stunning. There was something about her profile, the graceful curve of her neck, the way the morning light touched her face. "You're staring at me," Sarah said without turning, startling him. Jake cleared his throat, embarrassed to be caught. "Just checking if you're ready to cancel tonight's dinner." Sarah turned to face him, and Jake felt a strange twist in his stomach when their eyes met. "I'm not canceling." "Why not? What does that man have to offer that's so important?" Sarah tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. "Attention, respect, the feeling that I matter." Her words cut deeper than Jake expected. He moved closer to the counter, standing nearer to her than he had in years. "Do you matter to you?" Sarah challenged, her eyes blazing. "Really? Because until last night, I might as well have been a ghost." Jake couldn't answer. Because she was right. He had ignored her completely, treated her like part of the furniture. And now, looking at her, he couldn't understand how he had been so blind. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Sarah's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "Like what?" "Like you're seeing me for the first time." Jake swallowed hard. "Maybe I am." The silence between them grew heavy, charged with something neither of them could name. Sarah's heart raced. There was something different in Jake's eyes, an intensity she had never seen before. "Jake," she began, but he cut her off. "Cancel the dinner." "Why?" Sarah stood now, face to face with him. "Give me a real reason." Jake fought with the words. How could he explain this? The thought of another man touching her, making her smile, was driving him insane. How could he admit that? After 3 years of pretending she didn't exist, he suddenly cared too much. "Because you're my wife," was all he managed. "On paper," Sarah shot back, though something in her voice had shifted too. "On paper," Jake echoed, but his eyes told an entirely different story. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged like static. Sarah could feel the heat of his body, the faint scent of his expensive cologne mingling with something raw and undeniably male. "You've changed," she murmured. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, you barely remembered my name. Today, you're different." Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I don't know what's happening to me." The raw honesty in his voice caught Sarah off guard. It was the first time she had ever seen him like this, vulnerable, confused, human. "What did you feel last night when George was talking to me?" Jake looked at her for a long moment. "Anger. A ridiculous, irrational anger at the way he looked at you. Jealousy?" The word hung in the air between them. Jake didn't answer, but his eyes betrayed him. "Why?" Sarah pressed. "Why do you suddenly care?" "I don't know." Jake exploded, stepping away from her. "I don't know why I suddenly can't get you out of my head. I don't know why the thought of you having dinner with another man is driving me insane." Sarah's heart raced at the passion in his voice. 3 years of ice, and now this. "Jake, do you want the truth?" He turned back to her, his eyes burning. "I spent the entire night thinking about how I never really looked at you, how I was a complete fool for 3 years. How another man saw in one night what I refused to see in 3 years." Sarah's chest tightened. "And what did he see?" Jake moved closer again, his eyes roaming over her face as if memorizing every detail. "A woman who's intelligent, beautiful, strong." Someone who deserves to be cherished, not ignored. Tears stung Sarah's eyes. 3 years, Jake. I waited 3 years for even the smallest sign that you saw me as more than a burden. I know, and I hate myself for it. Then why now? Why only now? Jake hesitated, then admitted the hardest truth he had. Because watching another man want you made me realize that I want you too. And that terrifies me. The words lingered in the air between them, shifting everything. Sarah felt as if the ground beneath her had tilted. I'm still going to dinner with George tonight, she said, though her voice trembled. Why? Sarah lifted her chin, her resolve firm. You had 3 years to notice me, Jake. 3 years to treat me like your wife. You can't expect me to just forget all of that because you suddenly decided I exist. With that, she walked past him and up the stairs, leaving Jake alone in the kitchen, more unsettled and conflicted than he had ever been in his life. Upstairs, Sarah leaned against the bedroom door, her heart pounding. Everything had changed in an instant. The question was, what was she supposed to do with that change? She looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Tonight, she had chosen an emerald green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, one she had saved for years, waiting for a special occasion. Tonight, she felt she deserved to feel beautiful. To feel seen. At exactly 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. George was perfectly on time, just as he had promised. Sarah descended the stairs gracefully, a small black clutch in hand. She didn't see Jake anywhere. He was probably locked in his office as always. Sarah, you look stunning, George said, offering his arm like a true gentleman. Thank you, George. I'm looking forward to our conversation. What Sarah didn't know was that Jake was watching from his office window, his fists clenched as he saw another man take his wife out. The anger boiling inside him was irrational, primal, and utterly unfamiliar. George took her to one of the most exclusive restaurants in Beverly Hills. The atmosphere was elegant soft lighting, classical music drifting through the air. Sarah felt as if she had been transported into a world she had almost forgotten. A world where she was treated like a lady, not an invisible shadow. So, Sarah, George began once they had ordered dinner. Tell me about yourself. Jake doesn't speak much about his personal life. Sarah gave a small, sad smile. There isn't much to tell. At least nothing Jake would know. What do you mean? Well, she paused, then decided to be honest. My husband and I, we're not exactly close. This is probably the first social dinner I've had in 3 years. George raised his brows, astonished. That's hard to believe. A woman like you should be at every event in the city. Sarah laughed softly. You're kind, but the truth is, Jake prefers to keep our lives separate. What a shame, George muttered. Tell me your story. Yesterday, you mentioned you speak languages. Sarah's eyes lit up. Finally, someone wanted to know who she really was. I have a degree in business administration from UCLA. I speak French, Spanish, and Italian fluently. Before I got married, I worked for an international consulting firm. George leaned in, visibly impressed. That's incredible. What was your specialty? Emerging markets and international negotiations. I helped U.S. companies expand into Latin America. My God, Sarah, you're exactly the kind of person I need for my projects in Argentina and Chile. I have contracts that require someone with your expertise. Sarah felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. How long had it been since she felt useful, valued for her skills? It would be wonderful to work again, she admitted. I miss using my mind for something meaningful. At that moment, Sarah noticed a familiar figure walk into the restaurant. Her blood ran cold. It was Jake. He looked impeccable in a dark suit, but his expression was stormy. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room until they landed on her, and Sarah shivered at the intensity in his gaze. Sarah. His deep voice cut through the air as he approached their table. George stood politely. Jake, what a surprise to see you here. I'm sure it is, Jake replied coldly, his eyes never leaving Sarah. May I speak with my wife for a moment? Of course, George said, confused by the tension in the air. I'll step away for a minute. As soon as George walked off, Jake sat down in the empty chair, his eyes locked on Sarah. What are you doing here? she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The question is, what are you doing here? Having dinner like I said I would. Jake glanced around at the soft candles, the romantic music, the intimate atmosphere. This doesn't look like a business dinner. Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. And how would you know? You've never taken me to dinner. The words hit him like a punch. She was right. In 3 years of marriage, he had never taken her out, never shared a romantic meal with her. Sarah, Jake began, his voice lower now. I didn't know you had a degree in business. Sarah blinked, surprised. How do you know that? I overheard you two talking. You were spying on us? Jake actually looked ashamed. Yes, and I realized there's so much about you I never knew. 3 years, Jake, Sarah said, her voice laced with pain. You had 3 years to ask. To care. You speak 3 languages, Jake continued, almost as if listing his discoveries. You worked in international consulting. You're an expert in emerging markets. And that shocks you completely, Sarah admitted bitterly. What did you think I was? Just some simple girl your family chose for you? A burden you had to carry? Jake said nothing, because that was exactly what he had thought. You never took the time to find out who I really am, Sarah pressed, her voice rising. You never asked about my dreams, my ambitions, my fears. To you, I was just an inconvenient obligation. Sarah, no. She cut him off. You don't get to show up now, after 3 years of ignoring me, and act like you suddenly care. Jake leaned forward, his eyes burning with something she couldn't name. But I care more than I should. More than I even understand. Why? Because another man showed interest? Because you finally realized you might lose something valuable? Yes, Jake admitted harshly. Exactly that. The brutal honesty in his voice left Sarah speechless for a moment. At least you're honest, she murmured. As George returned to the table, he could feel the tension thick in the air. Is everything all right here? Jake stood, but his eyes never left Sarah. Goodbye, Sarah. I expect to see you at home later. It wasn't a request. It sounded almost like an order, spoken with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Sarah felt a mix of irritation and something else, something that made her heartbeat quicken. Maybe, she answered, keeping her dignity intact. Jake paused for a moment, as if he wanted to say more, then turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Sarah slightly shaken. Well, George said, settling back into his seat. That was intense. Your husband seemed possessive. Sarah let out a humorless sigh. 3 years of indifference and now possessiveness. Men are strange creatures. Sarah, George said gently, may I be honest? Of course. I saw the way he looked at you. That wasn't just possessiveness. That was desire, plain and simple. Sarah's cheeks warmed. You're imagining things. No, I'm not. And I also saw the way you looked at him. There's a history between you too complicated and unresolved. Sarah exhaled heavily. It's a long story. The best ones always are, George replied with a knowing smile. But let me say one more thing. Any man who ignores a woman like you for 3 years is a fool. But a man who finally realizes what he has, well, he can become dangerously determined not to lose it again. The rest of the dinner flowed with pleasant conversation about business and opportunities, but Sarah couldn't push Jake from her mind. The way he looked at her, the intensity in his voice, his raw admission that he cared. When George brought her home, it was past 11. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Sarah said sincerely. It's been so long since I felt this way. The pleasure was mine. And about the job offer, please, seriously consider it. You'd be the perfect addition to my team. Sarah nodded as George stepped away, then turned to face the mansion. The lights were off, except for one, the office. Jake was waiting. Sarah slipped inside quietly, but she knew she couldn't avoid the conversation looming between them. 3 years of silence had been shattered, and there was no turning back. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the quiet house. As she passed the office, the door opened. Sarah? She stopped but didn't turn. We need to talk, Jake said. Sarah finally faced him. Now you want to talk? After 3 years? Yes. Now. There was something in his voice that made Sarah freeze, a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. Fine, she said at last. Let's talk. Sarah stepped into Jake's office, nerves taut. The room was distinctly masculine. Dark wood shelves, leather chairs, and a massive desk where Jake spent most of his nights. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city lights. So, Sarah said, folding her arms. You wanted to talk. Jake turned slowly to face her. I want to understand. Understand what? You. Us. How we ended up here. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. 3 years, Jake. You had 3 years to understand anything about me. I know. And I admit I was negligent. Negligent? Sarah repeated, incredulous. You treated me like I was invisible. Jake ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. I didn't know how to act. This marriage wasn't my choice. Nor was it mine. Sarah shot back. Their eyes locked, the weight of 3 years of silence between them. Then why did you agree to it? Jake finally asked. A sharp pain struck Sarah's chest. You really don't know. I knew there was some kind of arrangement between our families, but I never asked for details. Of course you didn't, Sarah muttered. Why would you? You were getting a quiet, convenient wife. Sarah, please help me understand. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then sat down in one of the armchairs. The conversation they had avoided for 3 years was finally about to happen. You want the truth? She said softly. The truth about why a girl from a humble background married the all-powerful CEO, Jake Harrison. Jake sank into the chair across from her, his gaze locked on hers. Yes, I want to know everything. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories return. 3 years earlier, Sarah had been sitting at the kitchen table of the modest home where she grew up, in a small town 2 hours outside New York. Her mother, Anne, looked nervous, her hands trembling as she shuffled through some papers. Her father, Robert, paced back and forth, his face etched with worry. Mom, what's going on? Sarah asked, her anxiety rising. Anne exchanged a loaded glance with Robert before sighing deeply. Sarah, sweetheart, we need to talk to you about something very important. You're scaring me. Robert stopped pacing and sank heavily into the chair beside his daughter. Sarah, our business is in serious financial trouble. Sarah blinked, confused. Her parents' small accounting firm had always been stable, modest, but enough to support them. What kind of trouble? Debt, Anne whispered. A lot of it. We invested everything in expansion. It didn't work out. How much? Robert swallowed hard. $2 million. Sarah felt her blood run cold. $2 million? How is that even possible? We made bad partnerships. Risky investments. We trusted the wrong people. Robert explained, guilt heavy in his voice. And now? Now, Anne continued, we're about to lose everything. The business, the house, our savings. Your father might even face criminal charges. Sarah felt as if the ground had collapsed beneath her. There has to be something we can do. A bank. An investor. There is, Robert said slowly. There's one possibility. What is it? Anne reached for her daughter's hand. The Harrison family. They've been our clients for years. Their patriarch, Mr. Harrison, made us an offer. What kind of offer? In exchange for what? Robert hesitated. They'll pay off all our debts and give us a fresh start. In exchange for you marrying their son, Jake. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, trying to process the words. You can't be serious, she said, her eyes welling with tears. I know how it sounds, but it's our only option, Anne pleaded. You want me to sell myself? Literally? Sarah's voice cracked. It's not like that, Robert protested. The Harrisons are a respected and wealthy family. Jake is young, successful. You would have a good life. Sarah shook her head, disbelief flashing in her eyes. A life I didn't choose. Sarah, please. Anne begged. If you don't accept, we lose everything. Your father could go to prison. Sarah rose abruptly and walked to the window, her pulse racing. Her future was being decided by debts and deals. And if I say no? The silence that followed was her answer. She turned sharply toward her parents. You've already said yes, haven't you? Robert exhaled, guilt heavy on his face. We needed to make a quick decision. The creditors were closing in. Sarah's anger and despair collided inside her chest. And what about me? What about what I want, my dreams, my plans? You can still study, still work. This is just an agreement, Robert insisted. An agreement? Sarah repeated bitterly. You sold your daughter for $2 million. Sarah, it's not like that. You turned me into a transaction. She exploded. With that, she stormed into her room and locked the door. For hours, she cried, torn between fury and helplessness. How had her life come to this? Days later, Sarah met Jake for the first time. The meeting was formal, cold, more like a business arrangement than an introduction. He was handsome, polite, but distant. He treated her with professional courtesy, as if they were finalizing a contract. I hope you understand, Jake said at that first meeting. This is a mutually beneficial agreement between our families. I expect nothing more than discretion and the occasional public appearance. Sarah swallowed her pride and nodded. What choice did she have? Back in the present, Sarah opened her eyes to find Jake watching her intently. So now you know, she said, her voice raw with emotion. Your parents saved my family from ruin, and I was the price. Jake stood silent for a long time, absorbing the truth. I didn't know the details, he finally said. Of course you didn't. Why would you care? You had a convenient wife who wouldn't interfere in your life. I saved my family from prison and poverty. Everyone won't accept me. Sarah's voice broke. I lost my freedom, my dreams, my dignity. All for $2 million. Jake took a step closer, stopping just a few feet away. Sarah, I never realized how much this cost you. How could you? You never asked. In 3 years, you never once showed interest in how I felt or what I wanted. Jake's eyes softened. And what did you want? The question caught her off guard. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I represented financially. I wanted a real marriage, not a deal. I wanted to feel valued, not like a burden you had to carry. Jake slowly knelt in front of her chair, his blue eyes burning with intensity. And now? What do you want now? Tears stung Sarah's eyes. Now, I'm not sure anymore. 3 years of being ignored changed me. I got used to feeling invisible, to expecting nothing. But last night reminded me what it feels like to be seen, to be appreciated. It was terrifying and wonderful. Jake hesitated, then lifted his hand and gently brushed her cheek. Sarah, I know I have no right to ask this, but give me a chance. A chance? For what? She whispered. To start over. To know the woman I married, and to try to build something real between us. For the first time, Sarah saw vulnerability in his eyes. Why now, Jake? Why try after 3 years? His voice cracked. Because I finally see what I've lost. Because I realize I had an extraordinary wife, and I was too blind to see it. Because the thought of you with another man drives me insane. Sarah's heart pounded. But the pain of 3 long years still weighed heavily. I need time, she said at last. 3 years of hurt doesn't heal overnight. Jake nodded, lowering his hand. I understand. But Sarah, yes? I'm going to fight for you. For us. Even if it takes time, even if it's hard, I won't give up. Later that night, as Jake left her office, he carried the crushing weight of truth with him. 3 wasted years. A remarkable woman ignored. A marriage that could have been real if not for his arrogance. But now he knew the truth, and he was determined to win the heart of the woman who was his wife on paper, but who needed to become his wife in life. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Strange. Jake always left before she woke. Curiosity drew her downstairs, and what she saw nearly made her stop breathing. Jake was in the kitchen, not just drinking coffee, but cooking breakfast. Pancakes sizzled on the stove. A plate of fresh fruit sat on the counter, and 2 steaming mugs of coffee waited. "Good morning," he said, turning as she entered. He wore jeans and an open-collared shirt, more casual than she had ever seen him. "Good morning," Sarah replied cautiously. "What's going on?" "Breakfast," Jake said simply, flipping the pancakes with surprising ease. "You can cook?" she asked, incredulous. "I learned in college. Nothing fancy, but edible." She lingered in the doorway, studying him with suspicion. "Why are you doing this?" He turned off the stove and faced her. "Because I want to start over. For real this time." "Sit, please." Hesitant but curious, Sarah took a seat as he served the food. "Thank you," she murmured, still processing the surreal moment of sharing breakfast with her husband, for the first time in 3 years. "How did you sleep?" Jake asked as he sat beside her. She nearly choked on her coffee. "Excuse me? Did you just ask how I slept?" He nodded seriously. "Yes, and I intend to keep asking every day." She searched his face, trying to detect any trace of manipulation. "Why?" "Because we're married, Sarah, and I want us to really be married." 3 years, Jake. You had 3 years to decide that. "I know," he admitted, regret flickering in his eyes. "And I regret every single wasted day." Sarah ate in silence, her thoughts louder than the clink of silverware. "And what if I say it's too late?" she finally asked. Jake set his fork down and turned fully to face her. "Then I'll prove you're wrong." His voice carried an intensity that made her spine tingle. "How?" she challenged. "By showing you every single day the kind of husband I can be. The kind of man I can be for you." Sarah shot to her feet, her chair scraping across the floor. "You don't just decide overnight that you want to be a real husband and expect me to play along like nothing happened." Jake rose too, though his voice remained calm. "I don't expect you to agree. I expect you to give me the chance to earn it." Sarah let out a short, bitter laugh. "Earn it? I'm not surprised to be one." Jake nodded. "No, you're not. You're my wife. And I was a fool not to treasure that from the start." Pinned against the counter by his nearness, Sarah whispered, "You're confusing me. 3 years of distance and now this? I don't know what to believe." Jake leaned closer, his voice low. "Believe this. I've finally woken up. I finally see what's been right in front of me. The heat of his body, the familiar scent of his cologne, the intensity of his eyes. It was overwhelming." "Jake," she breathed, but he cut her off. "Cancel George. Whatever he offered, turn it down." "Why would I do that?" she asked, dazed. "Because I want you working with me," Jake said firmly. "Harrison Global has projects in Latin America. You're an expert in emerging markets. We need your skills. I'm offering you a partnership, professional and personal." Sarah blinked at him, stunned. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a chance to build something together." She stepped back, shaking her head. "This is insane." "No," he countered. "This is opportunity. And it's us. How do I know this isn't just a phase?" she demanded. Jake's voice dropped, his eyes blazing with determination. "Because I can't go back to ignoring you. Last night, watching you with another man, I realized it's impossible to pretend you don't exist. You're mine." Sarah froze, her breath caught. "Yours?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "Mine," Jake said, unwavering. "I am not your property, Jake Harrison." "No," he admitted, "but you are my wife. And I want you to be my wife in every sense of the word." Her heart hammered, her pulse racing. His intensity was dangerous, intoxicating. "And if I don't want that?" Jake gave her a slow, almost dangerous smile. "Then I'll have to change your mind." "How?" she whispered. Instead of answering, Jake stepped closer, his hand lifting gently to her face. "Starting with this," he murmured. His touch was unexpectedly tender, and after 3 years of being invisible, it was almost too much to bear. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. But Sarah couldn't. She knew she should, but the words wouldn't come. "You're playing with me," she breathed. "I'm not playing," Jake said, dead serious. I've never meant anything more in my life. The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken desire. Sarah finally pulled back, her voice trembling. I need time to think. How long? I don't know, days, weeks. 3 years don't vanish overnight. Jake nodded, unshaken. Fine. Take your time. But while you think, I'll keep proving the man I can be. For you. For us. I'm not giving up. Not this time. With that, he left the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone, her heart racing, her mind spinning, caught between the man who had ignored her for 3 years and the one who was suddenly fighting desperately not to lose her. Later that day, Sarah found flowers in her room. White roses with a simple card. For a new beginning. At lunchtime, Jake showed up at home. Something he had never done before, carrying Chinese food from a restaurant Sarah had mentioned liking years ago. How did he even remember that? That night, instead of locking himself in his office, Jake invited her to watch a movie in the living room. Sarah said no, but she noticed he left the door open and the volume low, almost as if he was waiting for her to change her mind. For 3 days, the pattern continued. Jake completely shifted his routine around Sarah. Breakfast together, lunches and dinners at home where he actually talked with her about her day. Sarah felt conflicted, cautious, but also curious. It was as if she was meeting a completely different version of the man she had married. He's really trying, Sarah whispered to herself on the 3rd night, watching Jake in the living room reading a book instead of working on his laptop. The real question was she willing to give him the chance he was asking for? And more importantly, was she willing to risk her heart again? A week had passed since Jake started his efforts to win Sarah back. She was still holding back, but she began noticing small changes in herself, looking forward to breakfast, wondering what they would talk about during dinner, catching herself watching him when he wasn't looking. That Friday morning, Sarah was in the garden reading when Mrs. Thompson came out holding the cordless phone. Mrs. Harrison, there's a man named George Peterson on the line. He says it's about business. Sarah felt a little wave of anxiety. She hadn't spoken to George in a week. Not since that dinner that had changed everything between her and Jake. Hello, George. Sarah, it's so good to hear your voice. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. And you? Great. Listen, I'm calling because I need an answer about our job offer. I've got meetings in Atlanta next week, and I'd love to have you on the team. Sarah hesitated. Over the last few days, Jake had mentioned more than once the idea of her working at Harrison Global, but she hadn't given him a final answer. George, I'm still considering my options. Of course I understand. How about we meet today to talk it over? I could pick you up, maybe grab lunch and go over the details. Sarah looked toward the house. Jake was in an important meeting and wasn't expected back until evening. All right. What time? Noon. Perfect. See you soon, Sarah. Sarah hung up the phone, unaware that Jake had come home early and overheard part of the conversation from his office window. Jake went upstairs with heavy steps, a familiar anger rising in his chest. George Peterson again. That man was becoming a persistent problem. All week, Jake had been doing everything he could to win Sarah back. He had rearranged his entire routine, canceled important meetings just to stay home, done everything in his power to show her what kind of husband he could be. And now George was back to complicate it all. At 11:30, Jake watched from the window as Sarah got ready. She had chosen a yellow dress that made her skin glow, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked stunning, and that only fueled his irritation. When George's car pulled up, Jake made an impulsive decision. He grabbed the keys to his Porsche and followed them. George took Sarah to an upscale restaurant in downtown Beverly Hills. The setting was elegant, but not as intimate as the first time, which Sarah appreciated. So, George said after they placed their order, "Tell me what's going on. You sounded different on the phone." Sarah sighed. "Things at home with Jake are complicated. He's changing, or at least pretending to." George leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "He's decided he wants to be a real husband now." "He's doing everything he can to win me over. And that's a bad thing?" Sarah picked at her food, distracted. "I don't know. 3 years of indifference don't just disappear in a week. But you're considering giving him a chance? I'm confused, Sarah admitted. Part of me wants to believe he's really changed. But the part that was ignored for 3 years is afraid this is just a phase. George reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. Sarah, can I be honest with you? Of course. You deserve more than scraps of attention when it's convenient for him. You deserve someone who values you from the start. Sarah looked at their hands, touched by George's sincerity. Thank you. That means a lot to me. That's why my offer still stands. Work with me. Be independent. You don't need to rely on his moods to decide your future. At that moment, Sarah saw a familiar figure walk into the restaurant. Her blood ran cold. Jake. He headed straight toward their table, his face expressionless, a mask of controlled coldness. What a coincidence to find you two here, Jake said, his voice dangerously calm. George released Sarah's hand and stood politely. Jake, what a surprise. I'm sure, Jake replied, his eyes fixed on George's hand, still resting near Sarah's. Jake, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. What are you doing here? Having lunch. Just like you, apparently. The tension at the table was palpable. Other diners began to glance in their direction. Why don't you join us? George offered, clearly trying to defuse the situation. How kind of you, Jake said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting for a real invitation. Sarah stared at him, stunned by his audacity. Actually, she said, we were having a private conversation. About business, I presume, Jake said, without taking his eyes off George. Yes, George confirmed. I'm trying to convince Sarah to accept my job offer. How interesting, Jake said, his tone making it clear he found it anything but interesting. And what kind of job is that? Sarah felt her anger rising. The kind that lets me use my education and skills, something you never cared to learn about. Jake turned to her, his gaze sharp. I offered you a position at Harrison Global. As a favor, Sarah shot back. George offered because he sees my professional value. I'm sure he sees a lot of things in you, Jake replied, his voice thick with innuendo. George cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe I should give you two some privacy. No, Sarah said quickly. You don't have to go anywhere. Jake stood abruptly. Actually, he does. Excuse me? George asked. You need to stop chasing after my wife. Sarah also rose to her feet, her face flushed with anger. Chasing? He's offering me a professional opportunity. He's offering more than that. And we all know it. George stood too, clearly offended. Jake, I think you're misunderstanding. Am I? Jake turned to George, his posture intimidating. You think I haven't noticed the way you look at her? The excuses you find to touch her? Jake, Sarah hissed, horrified. It's true, Jake said, raising his voice. He's interested in you, Sarah. And you're enjoying the attention. Sarah felt as if she had been slapped. How dare you? I dare because I'm your husband. On paper? Sarah shouted back. Only on paper. The entire restaurant was staring at them now. George placed some money on the table. I think I'd better go, he said quietly. Sarah, call me when you've decided about the offer. He left quickly, leaving Sarah and Jake locked in a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Congratulations, Sarah said, her voice trembling with anger. You just humiliated me in public. You humiliated yourself by letting him touch you that way. Sarah took a step forward, her eyes blazing. Who do you think you are? You ignored me for 3 years. 3 years. And now you act like you have some kind of right over me. Jake grabbed her arm, not forcefully, but firmly. Come with me. Let go of me, Jake. Everyone is watching. I don't care. Let them watch. But Jake was already guiding her out of the restaurant, his hands steady on her back. In the parking lot, away from prying eyes, Sarah yanked her arm free. How dare you? She screamed. How dare you follow me and humiliate me like that? I couldn't help it. Couldn't help what? Seeing you with him. Seeing another man touch you, look at you. Like what? Like he wanted you, Jake exploded. Sarah stopped screaming, stunned by the raw intensity in his voice. And what if he wants me? She asked, her voice quieter now, still full of defiance. Jake stepped closer, his blue eyes burning with something raw and primitive. And what if? He repeated. Sarah, you are my wife. Then act like my husband. That's what I'm trying to do. Following me, embarrassing me, acting like you own me. Jake ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a real husband. I never learned. The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Sarah was also shaken by the vulnerability in his tone. Then learn, she said, her voice calmer now. But not like this. Jake looked at her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her forget to breathe for a second. Sarah, he said, his voice hoarse. You have no idea what you're doing to me. What do you mean? Jake stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. I mean, you're driving me crazy. Completely crazy. Sarah's heart began to race. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity that stirred feelings she hadn't felt in a long time. Jake, you have power over me, he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. A power I don't understand. A power I can't control. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see the cold, controlling CEO. She saw a man lost, confused and deeply in love. Power, she repeated. To make me jealous, to make me lose control, to make me want things I didn't even know I wanted. Sarah felt a strange wave of satisfaction. After 3 years of feeling invisible, realizing she had that kind of effect on him was intoxicating. And what do you want? She asked, her voice softer now. Jake stared at her for a long moment before answering. You, Sarah, I want you. The words hung in the air between them in the parking lot. Sarah felt as if the world had stopped for a moment. 3 years of marriage, and it was the first time he had said those words with such honesty, with such feeling. Jake, she began, but he shook his head. Don't say anything now. Just think about what I said. They returned home in separate cars, the tension between them still heavy in the air. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon in her room, trying to process everything that had happened. His words echoed in her mind. I want you. It wasn't just physical desire she heard in his voice. It was something deeper, something desperate. The next morning, Sarah went downstairs for breakfast, hoping to see Jake, but he had already left. Mrs. Thompson told her he had gone out early for a business meeting that would take all day. Sarah felt an unexpected wave of disappointment. She had grown accustomed to having breakfast with him, to receiving his constant attention. Around 3 in the afternoon, her phone rang. It was George. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday. George, you don't need to apologize. I should be the one apologizing for Jake's behavior. Can I be honest with you? Of course. He's in love with you. Completely lost. I know the signs. Sarah's heart raced. You think so? I'm sure. The question is, how do you feel about it? Sarah was silent for a moment, confused. 3 years, George, 3 years of distance. And now, I don't know. He's different. Very different. Sarah, can I suggest something? Yes. Why don't you have dinner with me tonight? Just as friends. Jake can come too if he wants. Maybe it will help all of us figure things out. Sarah hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea. I'll be at Giovanni's at 8. If you change your mind, just send me a message. At 7 p.m., Sarah was getting ready when she heard Jake's Porsche pull into the garage. Her heart leapt. She had decided to have dinner with George, but now she wasn't sure it was the right choice. She walked downstairs in a sleek black dress, determined to maintain her independence. Jake was in the living room, still in his suit, but without his tie. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. I'm leaving, Sarah replied, taking a deep breath. I'm having dinner with George. Jake didn't move for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. You understand? Are you testing me? Sarah said, her eyes fixed on his. Seeing if I'll lose control again? Sarah was caught off guard by how perceptive he was. And will you? Jake walked toward her, stopping just a breath away. Yes, he said. I will hate every minute of it. I'll imagine him making you laugh, touching your hand, looking at you the way I should. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. But Jake continued. I won't follow you. I won't make a scene because I trust you. You trust me? You are an honorable woman, Sarah. Always have been. If leaving with him is truly what you want, a night with another man won't change that. Sarah looked at him, moved by the maturity in his response. And if I decide I want to go out with him? Jake closed his eyes for a moment, as if the question physically hurt him. Then I'll have to accept that I lost my chance. There was vulnerability in his voice that almost made Sarah cancel the dinner right then. Jake, go, he said, stepping back. But Sarah, yes, remember what I said yesterday. Remember that I want you. Not out of convenience, not out of obligation, because you are extraordinary, and I was a fool for not realizing it before. Sarah arrived at Giovanni's, her heart full of conflict. George was already there, elegant as always. Sarah, you came, he said, kissing her hand politely. I kissed, but George, we need to talk. Of course, let's sit. As soon as they sat down, Sarah got straight to the point. You were right about Jake. He's in love with me. George smiled. And you? How do you feel about that? Confused, scared. But I think I'm in love with him too. George nodded, as if he expected that answer. Then why are you here with me? Sarah sighed. Because I don't know if I can trust these feelings. 3 years is a long time to be ignored and suddenly be told you're loved. But people change. Sarah, sometimes it takes almost losing someone to realize what they mean to us. You're encouraging me to stay with my husband. George laughed. I'm being realistic. That man is hopelessly in love with you, and you with him. I'm just a catalyst in this story. A catalyst? I was the one who made Jake realize how he felt. Without competition, he might never have woken up to what was right in front of him. Sarah looked at George with respect. You're a very wise man, and a woman very loved. The question is, what are you going to do with that? Sarah felt a strange wave of satisfaction. After 3 years of feeling invisible, realizing she had that kind of effect on him was intoxicating. And what do you want? She asked, her voice softer now. Jake stared at her for a long moment before answering. You, Sarah, I want you. The words hung in the air between them in the parking lot. Sarah felt as if the world had stopped for a moment. 3 years of marriage, and it was the first time he had said those words with such honesty, with such feeling. Jake, she began, but he shook his head. Don't say anything now. Just think about what I said. They returned home in separate cars, the tension between them still heavy in the air. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon in her room, trying to process everything that had happened. His words echoed in her mind. I want you. It wasn't just physical desire she heard in his voice. It was something deeper, something desperate. The next morning, Sarah went downstairs for breakfast, hoping to see Jake, but he had already left. Mrs. Thompson told her he had gone out early for a business meeting that would take all day. Sarah felt an unexpected wave of disappointment. She had grown accustomed to having breakfast with him, to receiving his constant attention. Around 3 in the afternoon, her phone rang. It was George. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday. George, you don't need to apologize. I should be the one apologizing for Jake's behavior. Can I be honest with you? Of course. He's in love with you. Completely lost. I know the signs. Sarah's heart raced. You think so? I'm sure. The question is, how do you feel about it? Sarah was silent for a moment, confused. 3 years, George, 3 years of distance. And now, I don't know. He's different. Very different. Sarah, can I suggest something? Yes. Why don't you have dinner with me tonight? Just as friends. Jake can come too if he wants. Maybe it will help all of us figure things out. Sarah hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea. I'll be at Giovanni's at 8. If you change your mind, just send me a message. At 7 p.m., Sarah was getting ready when she heard Jake's Porsche pull into the garage. Her heart leapt. She had decided to have dinner with George, but now she wasn't sure it was the right choice. She walked downstairs in a sleek black dress, determined to maintain her independence. Jake was in the living room, still in his suit, but without his tie. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." "I'm leaving," Sarah replied, taking a deep breath. "I'm having dinner with George." Jake didn't move for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand." "You understand?" "Are you testing me?" Sarah said, her eyes fixed on his. "Seeing if I'll lose control again?" Sarah was caught off guard by how perceptive he was. "And will you?" Jake walked toward her, stopping just a breath away. "Yes," he said. "I will hate every minute of it. I'll imagine him making you laugh, touching your hand, looking at you the way I should." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. But Jake continued, "I won't follow you. I won't make a scene because I trust you. You trust me? You are an honorable woman, Sarah. Always have been. If leaving with him is truly what you want, a night with another man won't change that." Sarah looked at him, moved by the maturity in his response. "And if I decide I want to go out with him?" Jake closed his eyes for a moment, as if the question physically hurt him. "Then I'll have to accept that I lost my chance." There was vulnerability in his voice that almost made Sarah cancel the dinner right then. "Jake, go," he said, stepping back. "But Sarah, yes, remember what I said yesterday. Remember that I want you. Not out of convenience, not out of obligation, because you are extraordinary, and I was a fool for not realizing it before." Sarah arrived at Giovanni's, her heart full of conflict. George was already there, elegant as always. "Sarah, you came," he said, kissing her hand politely. "I kissed, but George, we need to talk. Of course, let's sit." As soon as they sat down, Sarah got straight to the point. "You were right about Jake. He's in love with me." George smiled. "And you? How do you feel about that?" "Confused, scared." "But I think I'm in love with him too." George nodded, as if he expected that answer. "Then why are you here with me?" Sarah sighed. "Because I don't know if I can trust these feelings. 3 years is a long time to be ignored and suddenly be told you're loved. But people change, Sarah. Sometimes it takes almost losing someone to realize what they mean to us." "You're encouraging me to stay with my husband," George laughed. "I'm being realistic. That man is hopelessly in love with you, and you with him. I'm just a catalyst in this story." "A catalyst?" "I was the one who made Jake realize how he felt. Without competition, he might never have woken up to what was right in front of him." Sarah looked at George with respect. "You're a very wise man, and a woman very loved. The question is, what are you going to do with that?" As they were talking, Sarah didn't notice anyone entering the restaurant. Jake decided he couldn't stay at home wondering what might be going on. He walked to the bar, ordered a whiskey, and observed from a distance. To his surprise, he didn't see George trying to seduce his wife, but rather two friends having a serious conversation. "Excuse me," a voice said beside him at the bar. Jake turned and saw George Peterson. "Jake, mind if I join you?" Jake gestured to the stool beside him. "Sarah's in the bathroom. I thought this would be a good time for us to talk about you being a very lucky man." Jake looked at him confused. "Your wife is an extraordinary woman, smart, loyal, strong, and completely in love with you. How can you be sure?" "Because she spent the entire night talking about you, about how you've changed, how she's confused, and how she's in love and scared at the same time." Jake felt something shift in his chest. "She didn't say exactly those words, but that's what I heard." "Jake, can I give you some advice?" "Go ahead." "Stop being afraid to give yourself completely. She needs to know you're not going to pull away from her again." Jake nodded, absorbing the advice. "What about your job offer?" George smiled. "Withdrawn. She belongs to Harrison Global now, and so do you." When Sarah returned from the bathroom, she found the two men talking calmly at the bar. "What's going on here?" she asked, confused. Jake stood up and walked over to her. George and I came to an understanding. What kind of understanding? I'm a lucky fool, Jake said, his eyes fixed on hers. And I'm not going to waste a second chance. Sarah looked between the two men. George, I'll leave you two to talk, George said as he grabbed his coat. Sarah, it was a pleasure to meet you. Jake, take good care of her. Once George left, Sarah turned to Jake. What are you doing here? I couldn't stay at home imagining you with another man. But you said ... double quotes. I said I trust you, and I do. But that doesn't mean it was easy. Sarah stepped closer to him. Jake, let's go home, he said gently. We need to have a real conversation this time. Sarah nodded, and they left the restaurant together. In the car, the tension was strong, but different. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was anticipation. Sarah, Jake said as he drove, when we get home, I'm going to tell you everything. Everything I feel, everything I want, everything I hope for us. Sarah's heart raced. And what if I said, I want to tell you everything too? Jake glanced at her quickly, then back to the road. Then we're going to have a very long night. Inside the mansion, Sarah and Jake stood at the entrance, staring at each other. The air was thick with tension and expectation. 3 years of silence were about to be broken forever. Sarah, Jake said gently. Before anything else, there's something I need you to know. What is it? I love you. The words hung between them. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Jake. No, let me finish, he said, stepping closer to her. I love you in a way I never thought possible. I fell in love with the strong woman you are, with the grace you've shown, even when I was cold, with the intelligence I was too blind to see. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. 3 years, she whispered. 3 years I've been waiting to hear those words, and I'm a fool for taking so long to say them. Jake reached out and gently touched her face. Sarah, I know I don't deserve it, but would you love me too? Sarah looked at him through her tears, seeing real vulnerability in his eyes for the first time. I've always loved you, she confessed. I think I always have, even when you ignored me. Even when it hurt so much, I wanted to give up. Jake closed his eyes as if her words brought him physical relief. Sarah. This time she stepped forward, placing her hands on his face. Kiss me, she whispered. Jake didn't need another word. He leaned in and kissed her softly at first, then with more intensity as Sarah responded. It was their first real kiss. In 3 years of marriage, they had never kissed with love, with longing, with the hope for a future together. When they pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Sarah, Jake whispered against her lips. I want to be your husband in every way. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. I want that too. Jake took her hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom she had never entered before, the master suite. The room was elegant, masculine, but warm. Sarah looked around, suddenly nervous. Sarah, Jake said, sensing her hesitation. If you're not ready ... it's not that, she quickly responded. It's just Jake. There's something you need to know. What is it? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage. I've never... double quotes. Jake furrowed his brow, confused. Sarah, what are you trying to say? I'm a virgin. She let the words escape, hurried and rushed. Jake froze completely as if struck by lightning. What did you say? I'm a virgin, Sarah repeated more softly this time. Jake looked at her in shock. Sarah, we're married. On paper, she reminded him. You barely spoke to me, much less. With me. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. My God, Sarah, you're 25 years old. I know how old I am, but how? Why? Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling exposed. Before I married you, I was focused on my studies and work, and after the wedding, well, you made it pretty clear you weren't interested in me. Jake kneeled in front of her, taking her hands. Sarah, I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never imagined. How could you? You never asked me about my life before the marriage. Jake closed his eyes, overcome with guilt. Do you hate me? No, Sarah said softly. I don't hate you, but I need you to understand. Tonight, if it happens, it will be my first time with someone. Jake looked at her, his expression changing. Sarah, are you sure? I can wait. We can wait. Sarah touched his face. I've waited 3 years to truly be your wife. I don't want to wait anymore. With infinite tenderness, Jake kissed her again. This time, with a reverence Sarah had never known. With patience, affection, and love, Jake kissed her again that night, in the most beautiful and intimate experience Sarah could have ever imagined. Sarah woke up to the smell of coffee and something sweet nearby. She slowly opened her eyes and found herself in Jake's room, now their room, with the morning sun filtering through the curtains. Good morning, my wife, a soft voice said. Sarah turned and saw Jake enter the room with a tray full of food. There were fresh croissants, fruit, coffee, orange juice, and even a small rose in a vase. Jake, she said, sitting up in bed. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, he said, placing the tray on the floor and sitting beside her. I wanted to do something special for the most important woman in my life. Sarah felt her heart warm. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had ignored her for 3 years. How are you feeling? He asked, gently touching her face. Different, Sarah admitted. Complete. Jake smiled and kissed her softly. I don't regret anything, Sarah said. Neither do I actually. I regret waiting so long. They had breakfast in bed, talking and laughing like never before. It felt like two strangers getting to know each other, but with the deep connection of people who had always been close. In the following days, Sarah saw a complete change in Jake. He canceled meetings to be with her, took her to places in New York she had never seen, and most importantly, he talked to her about everything. One night, while they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Jake, why were you so distant before? Even before we got married, people said you were cold. Jake sat in silence for a moment, then sighed. My family, he finally said. I was raised by the Harrisons. You know, my father, everything was about business, money, success. My mother, she cared more about appearances than about her own children. Sarah turned to look at him. They never taught me about love or real relationships. Everything was a transaction, a strategy. When our marriage was arranged, I treated it like any other deal. And then, Jake took her hand and intertwined their fingers. I know I was completely wrong. I've learned that love isn't a weakness. It's the strongest thing there is. Who taught you that? You did, he said, looking her directly in the eyes. By watching your strength, your dignity, your ability to love, even when it wasn't returned. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Jake. Sarah, I know 3 years of distance don't just disappear like that. I know you're still afraid I'll go back to how I was before. It was true. Even with all the changes, part of Sarah still feared it might not last. I'm afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid that when the novelty wears off, you'll start ignoring me again. Jake turned fully toward her, gently holding her face in his hands. Sarah Harrison, look at me. She did. I swear on my life and our love that I will never treat you like that again. You've changed who I am on the deepest level. There's no going back. How can I be sure? Because, Jake said, you're not just a victory for me. You're my redemption, my second chance to be the man I should have been from the beginning. In the following days, Jake proved his words with actions. He was present, attentive, protective, but not possessive. When Sarah decided to take on an independent consulting project, he fully supported her. Are you sure? Sarah asked. I'll be working with your competitors sometimes. I'm sure, Jake said. I want you to be happy and fulfilled. Your success is my success. Their physical relationship also deepened. Jake was patient, affectionate, always making sure Sarah felt loved and respected. Every kiss, every touch, every intimate moment was a confirmation of the love they shared. One night, after another night of closeness, Sarah finally said the words she had been holding back. I trust you. Jake turned to face her. Really? Truly, completely with my heart, my life, and our future. Jake kissed her deeply and promised never to break that trust. Sarah knew he was serious. The cold, distant man she had married 3 years ago had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who loved her with honesty and intensity. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah truly felt married, truly loved, truly whole. 2 months passed since Sarah and Jake truly began their marriage. They were happier than they ever imagined possible. Sarah had started her consulting work, and Jake supported her in every project. Their love grew stronger every day. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything changed. Sarah was organizing some papers in Jake's office when she found a folder that had fallen behind the desk. Curious, she opened it to see if it contained any important documents that needed to be filed. What she saw made her sink into the chair. They were contracts. Detailed merger contracts between Sarah's family's company, Miller Accounting, and Harrison Global. The dates were from about 3 years ago, around the time of their wedding. With trembling hands, Sarah read each page. The agreement was clear. Their marriage would guarantee the merger of the two companies. The Miller family would retain 20% of the new business, receive a large cash payout, and Jake would take full control of operations. This can't be, Sarah murmured, feeling a wave of nausea rise in her stomach. She kept reading and found something even worse. There were clauses about children, public appearances, and how the marriage had to last at least 5 years to ensure the stability of the merger. Sarah was literally part of a business contract. The door opened and Jake entered, smiling when he saw her. Sarah, you won't believe how productive the meeting was. Sarah, are you okay? Sarah slowly stood up, holding the contracts. Can you explain this? She asked, her voice strangely calm. Jake looked at the papers, and Sarah saw the color drain from his face. Sarah, let me explain. Explain what? That our marriage was a business deal? That I'm just part of a corporate merger? It's not like that. It's not. Sarah gave a bitter laugh. It's right here in black and white. Clause 5. The marriage between Jake Harrison and Sarah Miller will guarantee the full acquisition of Miller Accounting by Harrison Global. Jake reached out for her, but Sarah pulled back. Sarah, please, let me explain the context. What context? You knew this from the start. I knew about the merger. Yes, but what? Did you think I was too stupid to figure it out? Did you think you could use me forever without me finding out the truth? Sarah, you're misunderstanding. Sarah threw the contracts on the table. Am I? Then tell me, Jake, what part am I misunderstanding? The part where our marriage helped you take control of my family's business? Or the part where there are specific clauses about having children? Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly desperate. Sarah, yes, there was a business deal. But that was before I really knew you. Before I fell in love with you. Before you fell in love? Sarah repeated in disbelief. Jake, you knew this yesterday when you told me you loved me. You knew this last week when we made love. You knew this. All these months, while pretending our relationship was real, I wasn't pretending. My feelings were real. How can I believe that? How can I trust anything you've said when our entire marriage was built on a lie? Sarah started pacing, her anger and pain overwhelming her. My parents knew too, didn't they? That's why they pushed for the marriage so much. It wasn't just about paying debts. It was about selling the family business. Jake didn't respond, and that silence told her everything. My God, Sarah whispered. I was sold twice, once to save the debts, and once more to make sure you got everything. Sarah, please. No, Sarah exploded. Don't touch me. Don't tell me you love me. It was all a lie. It wasn't a lie. What we feel is real. Sarah turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. How can I know what's real? How can I trust anything when I've just discovered I'm just a piece in a business deal? Jake took a step toward her. Because you know my heart. You know who I became with you. Do I? Or are you just a really good actor? The accusation hit Jake like a punch. Sarah, you know that's not true. Do I? 2 hours ago, I thought my husband loved me for who I am. Now I find out he loves me because I made him richer. The company means nothing compared to you. Then prove it, Sarah challenged. If you love me more than the business, undo the merger. Give my family's company back. Jake hesitated, and that hesitation was all Sarah needed to see. I thought so, she said, her voice breaking. When it comes to choosing between me and the money, you choose the money, just like you did 3 years ago. Sarah, it's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Sarah shouted. Either you love me for who I am, or you love me for what I represent financially. It can't be both. Sarah rushed to the bedroom and began packing her bags. Jake followed her. What are you doing? Are you leaving? I'm going to a hotel. Sarah, don't do this. We can fix this. Fix it? Sarah turned to him. How can we fix the fact that our whole marriage was based on a lie? Because what we have now isn't a lie. Sarah stopped folding the clothes and looked at him. How can I be sure? How can I know if you've really changed or if you're just getting better at pretending? Jake stayed silent. No answer. That's what I thought, Sarah murmured, zipping up the suitcase. Sarah, please don't go. Stay and let's talk. We'll figure this out. Sarah looked at him one last time, her heart breaking. Jake, I need time to process all of this. I need to figure it out. Distinguish what's real from what's just a performance. And if I tell you I won't let you go? Sarah lifted her chin with dignity. Then you'll prove that nothing has changed. That you still think you can control me? Jake stepped back, realizing that forcing her to stay would only confirm her fears. How long? I don't know. Maybe forever. Sarah grabbed her suitcase and walked toward the door. Sarah, Jake called, his voice cracking. I love you. This is real, even if nothing else is. Sarah stopped at the door without turning around. I hope so, Jake. Because if it's not, then we really have lost everything. Sarah had been staying in a modest hotel in downtown New York for a week, 7 days of pain, confusion, and tears. She hadn't answered Jake's calls, hadn't responded to his messages, and told the hotel reception not to give out any information about her. She needed time to process everything. The marriage that had finally become real was built on a huge lie. How could she trust anything after that? Meanwhile, Jake was living his own nightmare. The mansion felt empty without Sarah. He couldn't eat, barely slept, and couldn't focus on work. But it was time to act. Sarah had thrown down a challenge. If he really loved her more than the business, he had to prove it. On Monday morning, Jake entered the conference room at Harrison Global, where his father, Robert Harrison, was waiting with the company's lawyers. Jake, you called this urgent meeting. What's this about? Jake placed a folder on the table. I want to undo the merger with Miller Accounting. The silence in the room was deafening. What did you say? Robert asked incredulously. I want to give the company back to the Miller family. Completely. Are you out of your mind? That merger is worth $15 million. I know exactly what it's worth, Dad. Robert stood up, visibly angry. Jake, you can't just undo a 3-year contract on a whim. This isn't a whim. It's the right thing to do. The right thing? You destroyed your marriage for this? Jake stood as well, locking eyes with his father. I didn't destroy my marriage. You did when you included my wife in a business deal without telling me all the terms? Terms? Jake, you knew there were business advantages to the marriage. I knew it would be beneficial, but I didn't know Sarah was literally part of the contract. I didn't know there were clauses about kids, about how long we had to stay married. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, technically undoing the merger is possible, but it would cost a fortune in legal fees and settlements. I don't care about the costs, Jake interrupted. Make it happen. Robert grabbed his son's arm. Jake, think about what you're doing. $15 million. The company's reputation. Jake pulled away. Dad, my whole life you taught me that money is the most important thing. That business comes first. But you were wrong. What do you mean wrong? Sarah is worth more than $15 million. She's worth more than the whole company. She's worth more than anything I have or will ever have. Robert shook his head. You're being irrational, emotional. I'm being human, something you never taught me to be. Jake turned to the lawyers. I want you to prepare all the necessary documents. The accounting books from Miller should go back to Robert and Ann Miller. Any money they received as part of the deal, let them keep it. Consider it compensation for the last 3 years. Jake. Robert tried to argue. The decisions have been made, Jake said. Dad, I'm going to win my wife back and I'm going to do it the right way this time. Jake left the room, determined. He had one stop to make before going after Sarah. Robert and Ann Miller were having coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Ann went to answer it, surprised to see Jake standing there. Jake, what a surprise. Please come in. Jake walked in and found Robert in the living room. Robert, Ann, I need to talk to you about something important. Of course. Sit down. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. Jake took a deep breath. I want to return the favor. Robert and Ann exchanged a confused look. What do you mean return it? Miller Accounting, Jake said. I want to cancel the merger and give everything back to you. But why? Ann asked. Because I found out Sarah learned about the terms of the deal, about how the marriage was part of the business deal. Robert sighed deeply. We were afraid this day would come. You should have told her from the start. We know, Ann said, her eyes welling with tears. But we were desperate. The debt, the possibility of Robert going to jail. I understand the circumstances, Jake said. But Sarah feels betrayed by all of us. And she's right. Where is she? Robert asked. She's at a hotel. She hasn't spoken to me in a week. Ann started crying. We lost our daughter because of our greed. They haven't lost her, Jake said firmly. But we need to fix this. That's why I'm giving everything back. Sarah needs to know that she's more important than any business. Jake, Robert said. Are you sure? This must mean millions to your company. I'm absolutely sure. Without Sarah, none of this means anything. Jake stood up. The lawyers will contact you to discuss the legal details. I want everything wrapped up by the end of the week. After Jake left, Robert and Ann sat in silence, trying to process what had just happened. He really loves her, Ann murmured. Yes, but the question is, will it be enough? Sarah was in the hotel room, trying to read a book when suddenly she felt a wave of nausea. She ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. Once it passed, she sat on the bathroom floor, trying to understand what was happening. She had been feeling strange for days, tired, nauseous, emotional. Then a terrifying thought crossed her mind. It can't be, she whispered. Sarah looked at her phone's calendar. Her period was late. Way late. With trembling hands, she dressed and left the hotel. At the nearest pharmacy, she bought 3 different pregnancy tests. Back in the room, she took all 3 and waited for the longest minutes of her life. Positive, positive, positive. Sarah sat on the bed, staring at the tests, and started crying. She wasn't sure if it was from joy, fear, or total despair. She was pregnant with Jake's child, the man she loved but no longer fully trusted. The man who had lied to her about the foundation of their marriage. How could she raise a child in the middle of all this confusion? How could she make decisions about her future when she didn't even know if her marriage was real or just part of a deal? Sarah grabbed her phone, dialed Jake's number, but couldn't press the call button. What would she say? How would she explain? Instead, she sent a simple message. I need to talk to you. It's important. His reply came within seconds. Where? Sarah looked around the impersonal hotel room where she'd been hiding for a week. In our room at home. 1 hour. She needed familiar ground for this conversation because after this, nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah was pregnant, and that changed absolutely everything. She arrived at the Harrison mansion with her heart racing. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door with the key she had never returned. The house was quiet, but she could feel Jake's presence somewhere inside. She slowly climbed the stairs, each step echoing through the empty hallway. She entered the bedroom they had shared for the past few months, the room where they had discovered love, where they had truly become husband and wife. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, the 3 pregnancy tests hidden in her purse. How would she tell him? How would she explain that she was carrying the child of a man she no longer fully trusted? The sound of the Porsche pulling into the garage made her stand up. Jake was home. A few minutes later, she heard his footsteps on the stairs. The door opened, and he appeared, looking exhausted, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Sarah?" he said softly. "You've come back." Sarah tried to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she started crying. The emotions of the past week, the betrayal, the pain, the fear, and now the pregnancy hit her all at once. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Jake ran to her, kneeling beside the bed. "Please tell me what's happening." Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, her body trembling. Jake hesitated, then wrapped his arms around her, holding her close to his chest. "It's okay," he whispered, stroking her hair. "I'm here. We will get through this." "No, Jake," Sarah managed to say between sobs. "It's not okay. Nothing is okay. Tell me what I can do. Anything." Sarah pulled away from him and wiped her tears. "There's something I need to tell you. Something that changes everything." Jake felt a knot in his stomach. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "First, I need you to tell me something and be honest with me. Anything. What did you do about the merger? About my parents' company with all the debt?" Jake looked her in the eyes. "I canceled it. Miller Accounting goes back to your parents next week. They can keep it." "The money they received." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You really did that?" "I did. $15 million, Sarah. I returned everything. Why?" Jake held her hands. "Because you are worth more than any amount of money. Because I want you to know that my love for you has nothing to do with business." Sarah started crying again, but this time, it was tears of relief. "Jake," she whispered. "Sarah, I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I should have told you everything about the deal from the beginning, but my feelings for you are real. You've completely changed my life." Sarah looked at him, seeing nothing but honesty in his eyes. "I believe you," she whispered. "Really?" "Really. And now I need to tell you something that will change our lives forever." Jake held his breath. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out the 3 pregnancy tests, placing them on the bed between them. "I'm pregnant, Jake." Jake stood completely still, looking at the tests. Then he looked at Sarah and then back at the tests. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if he couldn't quite grasp the word. "Yes, I found out today." Suddenly, Jake pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that surprised her. When they broke apart, he was crying. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I love you so much, and I already love this baby too." Sarah felt her heart warm. "You feel that?" "Even after everything, all the confusion, especially because of this," Jake said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "This baby will be born out of true love, not a contract. This is our new beginning." Sarah fell into his arms, finally allowing herself to feel joy. "Now it's just the 3 of us," Jake whispered in her hair. "A real family. A real family," Sarah repeated, smiling through her tears. 6 months later, Sarah was radiant in her white wedding dress. Her 6-month belly fit perfectly into the soft fabric. This time, she had chosen every detail: the dress, the flowers, the music. This time she was marrying for love. The ceremony was held in the garden of the Harrison property, decorated with white roses and soft lights. The guests were few, just close family and true friends. Jake stood waiting at the altar, looking perfect in his tuxedo, tears in his eyes as he watched her walk toward him. "Today," said the Reverend efficiently, "Jake and Sarah renew their vows, not out of duty or agreement, but for true love." "Sarah," Jake said, taking her hands. "3 years ago, I married you for convenience. Today, I marry you because I can't imagine life without you. You've taught me what love is. You've taught me to be human." Sarah smiled, tears running down her cheeks. "Jake, you showed me that true love is worth waiting for, that people can change, that second chances are real. I promise to love you and our child forever." When they kissed, the guests clapped, But Sarah could only hear her heart beating in sync with Jake's. 1 year later, Sarah looked out the window of the small office they now shared in downtown New York. The sign on the door said Harrison and Miller Consulting, the company they had started together with their own savings. They started small, but in just 1 year they already had 15 employees and contracts in 3 countries. Sarah focused on emerging markets. Jake handled corporate strategy. They were the perfect team. "How's our little CEO?" Jake asked, walking into the office holding their 3-month-old son. Sarah smiled and took the baby from his arms. David Jake Harrison had his father's blue eyes and his mother's sweet smile. "He's perfect," said Sarah, kissing the baby's forehead. "Just like his mother," Jake whispered, kissing Sarah softly. "Your parents received a generous son when the merger was undone. Enough to start over comfortably." Miller Accounting was thriving again, now run by Robert with renewed energy. "Have you ever regretted it?" Jake asked, as he sometimes did. "Staying with me after everything." Sarah looked at her husband, her son, and the company they had built together. "Never," she said firmly. "You proved that true love is worth more than any amount of money." Jake embraced her, keeping the 3 of them close. What did you think of Sarah and Jake's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay up to date with all of our stories. And check out more exciting stories here on the end screen.